Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest Tory flap as they react, rather childishly, to the news that Sue Gray will be able to take up her position with the Labour Party this autumn. There are several levels of hypocrisy to the Tories' objections here though. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So just to remind people how the Sue Gray story unfolded, before I get onto the shameless hypocrisy of the Conservatives complaining about it, earlier this year, around about March, the news leaked that Sue Gray, famous for conducting the internal Partygate investigation, chosen by Boris Johnson to do so, would be taking up a job with Keir Starmer as his chief of staff. The Tories completely melted down. But moves like this are actually fairly well established. It's very common. They try to make it, it never happens. This happens all the time. When Labour were last in power, but near the end, George Osborne, for example, hired a senior member of the civil service to work for him. Nobody in the Labour Party made a fuss. No one went, this man's working for us, he's going to go with our secrets. No, because it's the sort of thing that happens all the time. When a party has been out of power for a long time and the senior members of the party have no experience in government, of course it makes sense to hire people with an understanding of how government works in order to get them ready for office. And Sue Gray has an impressive reputation. That is partly why they're losing their minds. It was a stunning coup for Starmer. And I gather initially she turned it down as well. He had to work to persuade her. And that's what's really upsetting the Tories. They argued that it showed the lack of neutrality within the civil service. Because remember, they're trying to blame the civil service for all sorts of failures now. Brexit's not working. It must be the civil service. Oh, yeah, it's not because just Brexit's crap, is it? Oh, nothing's working, though. Yeah, that's because you're not working. But this is a complete nonsense. Like, if the civil service were not neutral, and there'll be times when you can say, and I'm going to come up with one in this video where you could say, well, that's not particularly neutral. You'd expect them to behave in a way which favours the party of government, not the opposition. What can the opposition do to them? Nothing. What can the government do to them? Oh, make life very difficult for them. Indeed, Sue Gray came in for criticism, not least by me, when she failed to investigate the ABBA party in Boris Johnson's flat. She was supposed to be investigating the partying that took place in Downing Street. She steered well clear from the party taking place in 11 Downing Street where Boris Johnson was living. She claims, I hadn't got around to it. And then the police started investigating, so I just left it to them. But the police didn't investigate it either, because they say it's not the job of the police to gather evidence. I kid you not, that's what they said. But the bottom line was that neither Gray nor the police wanted to touch that party with a 10-foot barge pole. You could argue this is a sign of not taking a neutral stance, because it would have been treading on the toes of the government. In fact, the head of the government, who is in a position to make the life difficult, and Boris Johnson is known to be a very spiteful man. In fact, we've seen it now, haven't we? Also, the Cabinet Secretary, a man known to resent Gray because he's shit and she's affected and respected, tried to recommend an effective 18-month block on Gray taking up her appointment. Now, if there is a lack of neutrality in the civil service, this would be a good place to look at it, wouldn't it? Why would the Cabinet Secretary, who's supposed to be politically neutral, but we have seen from the leaked Matt Hancock WhatsApp messages, behaving like a Tory stooge, try to engineer a block on Gray being able to take up her role even after the general election? Because it would go beyond them. Not sure what he's after. He's already got a knighthood. Not much point in him hoping for a peerage when Labour want to abolish the House of Lords. Some Tories initially thought that they could use the news to try and smear the Privileges Committee investigation by not only saying that Gray's report is now suspect, but the committee were basing their work on it. Neither of these was true. The committee said that they're not using Sue Gray's report as part of their proceedings. And also about the report, Boris Johnson accepted the findings of Gray's report entirely. Now, given that he was the centre of the report and it was about things he did, he would have known if something wasn't right. He'd have gone, hang on a minute, that didn't happen. But no, he said, oh yeah, this is all very fair. Also, despite the Tories suggesting that Gray was working on the report at the same time as Labour in talks with her, we know this isn't true. Some were wondering at the time when it all broke, why, because Starmer was being asked, so when did you make your approach then? When did this happen? And he wasn't answering. And they were going, well, why aren't you answering? it would have settled a lot of questions. But I fairly quickly came to the conclusion that first, he was being evasive, deliberate. Maybe it was just winding the Tories up because he knew the public didn't care, but it was winding the Tories up. But in reality, it was because he didn't want to prejudice the Okoba review into the appointment. Because although neither Starmer nor Gray were answering questions in public about the recruitment process, they both submitted full details to Okoba themselves. So we know a lot of the details now that that process has concluded. Okoba is the group, by the way, who decide, amongst other things, what period of gardening leave needs to exist between leaving a position and taking up the next position. You know, the Tories wanted the full 2 years. 2 years is the maximum. But they've now announced that actually 6 months is enough time. Which brings me on to another bit of hypocrisy. So ask why the Tories wanted the full 2 years. They say, well, it's because she knows things about how the government have been conducting themselves. She'll have been privy to sensitive conversations and it would be quite wrong to pass this information on to the Labour leader. Now, it would be quite wrong to pass such information on to the Labour leader, but I have three things to say about that. The first is that Sue Gray has been employed as Starmer's Chief of Staff. She's getting his office ready to start delivering in government. That's it. It's not her role to divulge confidential information to the leader of the opposition. Secondly, if the Tories go, yes, but we can't trust Sue Gray, you see, not to divulge confidential information, then a 2-year period of gardening leave doesn't stop that. She isn't banned from talking to Starmer, only from taking up her position until the gardening leave period is over. But the position, her job, doesn't involve passing on sensitive information. If she were dishonestly inclined to pass on the secret, she don't need to be working for Starmer. She could just ring him up and tell him stuff. And the third thing to say is that Boris Johnson was also given a period of gardening leave after leaving government before he was allowed to go around the world giving speeches, and for the same reason. But Boris Johnson's leave period was set at 3 months. So a senior official has been given double the period of gardening leave as the Prime Minister, even though he was privy to way more sensitive information. Also, Boris Johnson completely ignored it anyway, because you may think, well, didn't he go off on speeches straight away? Yeah, he did. He didn't. He was so... Prime Minister, or former Prime Minister, you've got 3 months before you're allowed to go around talking to people. No, I've got a flight booked for tomorrow. Went off straight away. So any Boris Johnson supporters especially that are whining about the arrangements for Sue Gray are the worst type of hypocrites. And surprise, surprise, it's the Boris Johnson supporters who are whining the loudest about all this. But Okoba have said, according to a report in the Times, that the lengthy ban that the government and Cabinet Office wanted would have been unprecedented. Basically, it's not justified. It would have been completely unprecedented. Nothing like this would have ever happened. And in terms of where this leaves the Tories now, aside from crying in the gutter, the Times article does note that the government could ignore the advice from Okoba, it is just advice, and impose the longer gardening leave period anyway. However, this doesn't work because it's not legally binding. Just as Boris Johnson ignored his gardening leave, Gray could ignore hers. Like if the government tried to impose an excessive period, she could just say, no, that's rubbish. In fact, she could take up her appointment right now. There's nothing stopping her. Just like there was nothing stopping Boris Johnson ignoring that advice. But both Gray and Starmer have been clear that they want to respect the rules. They don't want to play fast and loose. So they will comply with Okoba's judgment. But nothing requires them to go along with what would be an obviously politically motivated stitch-up if the government tried to go, no, we're going to do our own thing, especially when it is unprecedented. Mind you, I'd be surprised if the government even tried to interfere. We'll wait and see, but I don't think Sunak has shown much appetite for this fight. It's mostly Johnson's posse making a fuss. And the fuss is entirely spiteful. Gray doesn't work as a civil servant, so no one can complain that it's impacting her work. She didn't do the work. She stepped down as soon as the news was announced that she'd be taking up this role with Starmer. So the gardening leave period has already started. Her role will be to prepare Keir Starmer for government, and that's it. Because it's one thing to have a lot of policies and you can have detailed plans, but if you don't know how Whitehall works, it will take you a while to get anything done. So they need someone, because Keir, the front bench, Labour's front bench have got limited experience in government, and Starmer has no experience in government. So they need someone to say, well, this is how it's going to work in practice. These are our policies. These are our plans. Right. Here's how you turn it into a workable plan. Gray's role is to make sure that Starmer can get to work immediately. And if the Tories win the election, it's no skin off their nose, is it? What the Tories want is for Starmer not to have this expert advice should he win the election, so that he can't govern as effectively. I keep saying the Tories want to win elections not because they want to govern. They don't do that. It's to stop others governing. They're seat fillers. And this is no different. They're losing their minds because Sue Gray will be a very effective asset for Starmer. This will make Starmer's government stronger and able to govern more effectively. The Tories' nightmare. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.